Welcome back to Coffeesodes, everybody. I can't believe it. We're on episode 29 already. Time flies when you're having fun, especially when you're diving deep into research like we are today. Make sure to check out the episode description for all the details on the studies we're looking at today. But for now, grab your coffee, get settled in, and let's explore the science of tickling.
All right, so we've got this fascinating paper from the Royal Society about tickling. It's not just about the ha-ha kind of tickling. It actually breaks down tickling into two types. Nismesis, that light, feathery feeling, and then there's gargullosis, the heavier, more playful kind that makes us laugh.
Yeah, and what's really cool is they didn't just rely on people saying how ticklish they felt. They actually measured it. They looked at facial expressions, chest movements, even before you actually start laughing out loud. And of course, the sounds of the laughter itself.
So they were analyzing those split-second reactions that happen when you're getting tickled.
Exactly. They found that your facial expressions and chest movements actually change within 300 milliseconds of being tickled. That's faster than you can blink.
Wow.
Laughter takes a tiny bit longer,
Yeah.
around 500 milliseconds. But that's still incredibly fast.
So my body is betraying my ticklishness before I even have time to process it.
Pretty much. It
Would
seems
you
like our bodies are just hardwired to respond to this particular kind of touch.
And that brings us to one of the big mysteries of tickling, the tickle effect. Why can't we tickle ourselves?
Right. It feels like a cruel trick of nature. I mean, I've tried. But all I get is a weird arm cramp.
Well, think of it this way. Your brain is like a prediction machine. It's constantly anticipating the sensations that you're about to experience, especially if you're the one causing them. So when you try to tickle yourself, your brain already knows what's coming, and it dampens the sensation. It's like your brain saying, hey, I know what you're doing. No need to get all worked up about it.
So my brain is basically filtering out the sensation to avoid sensory overload. And this is happening all the time. Think about the feeling of your clothes on your skin. Your brain filters that out so you can focus on other things. Tickling is just a more, I guess, noticeable example.
That makes a lot of sense. But this research goes even further than that, right? It suggests that it's not just about predicting your own touch, but any simultaneous touch, even from someone else.
Imagine two people trying to whisper to you at once. You might struggle to hear either one clearly. It seems like the same thing could be happening with touch. So if someone's tickling you, and you happen to touch that same spot at the same time, your brain might actually reduce the overall sensation.
Well, then, are you saying there's a strategy for winning tickle fights?
Yeah.
If I strategically tickle myself while someone else is trying to tickle me, I could actually make myself less ticklish.
The study did find that when people tickled themselves at the same time they were being tickled by someone else, they did report feeling less ticklish. But remember, this is just one study. We need more research to really understand how this works.
Okay, so maybe I shouldn't rewrite the tickle fight rulebook just yet, but this is already making me rethink my whole approach to tickling. So did they also look at how ticklish people felt, not just the physical reaction?
They did, and this is where it gets really interesting. They asked people to rate their ticklishness, and then they compared those ratings to their physical responses. What they found was that the intensity, the pitch, even the speed of someone's laughter directly correlated with how ticklish they said they felt.
So you're telling me my laughter betrays me. The more I'm cracking up, the more ticklish I actually am.
It seems that way. What's interesting is that this might mean that tickling isn't just about touch. It could be a multisensory experience. The sounds we make, our laughter, might actually contribute to how ticklish we feel.
Wow. So tickling isn't just a feeling, it's like a whole body experience. Our brains, our muscles, our laughter, it's all connected.
Exactly. And the research supports this idea even further. They found that self-tickling didn't just reduce the feeling of being tickled. It also delayed the onset of laughter, particularly when people tickled themselves on the same side of the body that was being tickled externally.
So our brains are working overtime to constantly filter and interpret these sensations, even something as seemingly simple as a tickle. It makes you wonder, what other things are our brains doing behind the scenes that we're not even aware of?
That's the beauty of scientific exploration. It's constantly revealing new layers of complexity in even the most everyday experiences.
Well, this deep dive has already given me a whole new perspective on something I thought I knew. But before we get too philosophical, let's take a quick break to refill those coffee mugs. We've covered a lot of ground, and there's still much more to explore.
While those coffee mugs are being copped off, let's think about the bigger picture here. This research really highlights how our brains are constantly distinguishing between sensations we create ourselves and those coming from the outside world.
Right. And that just makes sense. We're flooded with sensory information all the time. Like if our brains didn't have a way to filter all that out, we would be completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. But this filtering process, it isn't just about avoiding sensory overload. It's also crucial for how we understand the world and how we relate to other people.
Okay. So where does something like tickling fit into that? It seems pretty basic, almost instinctual.
Well, consider this. Tickling involves touch, which is one of the most fundamental ways that we experience our surroundings. But it's not just any touch, is it?
Yeah, it's usually playful, social.
Exactly. So tickling might be tapping into something deeper, something about how we form those social connections and learn to trust each other.
Now that you mention it, I remember reading that tickling is one of the first ways that babies communicate with their caregivers.
That's right. For babies, it's a way to learn about their own bodies, to experience that positive physical contact, and to start building those really crucial social bonds.
So even though tickling seems like a really silly, lighthearted thing, it could actually play a role in our social and emotional development.
Absolutely. And this research on the tickle effect, it adds another layer to that. It suggests that our ability to differentiate between self-touch and other touch might be essential for developing that sense of self, a sense of where our body ends and where the outside world begins.
I never thought of it that way. So the next time I try to tickle myself and fail miserably, at least I can take comfort in knowing that my brain is doing some pretty complex work to maintain my sense of self.
Exactly. And it's not just about self-awareness. This research also has implications for how we understand conditions like autism spectrum disorder.
Really? How so?
Well, some people with autism, they experience sensory sensitivities, including an aversion to certain types of touch. Is it possible that those sensitivities could be linked to differences in how their brains process self-touch versus other touch? It's a question that researchers are currently exploring.
That's a fascinating connection. So by studying something as simple as tickling, we might gain insights into much more complex neurological conditions.
That's why basic research is so important. It often leads to unexpected discoveries and applications that we couldn't have predicted.
This whole deep dive has been full of surprises. But before we wrap up, I have one more question that's been bugging me. We've talked about why we can't tickle ourselves, but the research also found that self-tickling can actually reduce how ticklish we are when someone else is tickling us. So how does that work? Is it just a distraction, or is there something more going on?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of how our brains process multiple sensory inputs at once. Remember, this research suggests that our brains might have a general mechanism for reducing the intensity of simultaneous touch sensations.
So my brain is basically trying to simplify things, focusing on one touch sensation at a time.
That's one possibility. It's also possible that our brains prioritize certain types of touch over others. Maybe self-touch is generally considered less important than touch from another person because it doesn't really provide any new information about the world.
So my brain is saying, yeah, I know that's my own hand, nothing to see here.
Right. But it's important to remember that this is all still being investigated. We need more research to fully understand how our brains handle these complex sensory interactions.
Well, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. I'm going to be keeping an eye on this research for sure. So what are some of the next steps that you see for this field of study?
Well, there's still so much we don't know about tickling. We need more research to understand exactly how the tickle effect works in the brain, how tickling plays into our social and emotional development, and as we discussed, to investigate the potential links between tickling and conditions like autism.
It sounds like there's a whole world of research just waiting to be explored.
And I can't wait to see what we discover next.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. But before we get too tickled by all the possibilities, let's move on to our final thoughts.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Because this seemingly simple act of tickling, it might offer us a window into understanding some much bigger questions about consciousness, self-awareness, even social interaction.
Whoa, hold on. We're going from tickle fights to deep philosophical pondering here. I'm intrigued, but also slightly terrified.
Don't worry, it's not as daunting as it sounds. Think about it. What is tickling, really? It's a physical sensation, sure.
Yeah.
But it also triggers an emotional response, laughter.
Right. We laugh when we're happy, when we're with people we enjoy, when we find something amusing. It's a way of connecting with others.
Exactly. So tickling, this seemingly simple act, could be tapping into some very fundamental aspects of what it means to be human.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. So by studying tickling, we might actually learn more about how our brains process emotions, how we develop social bonds, and how we distinguish ourselves from others.
Precisely. And this research on the tickle effect, the fact that we can't tickle ourselves, it adds another layer to the puzzle. It suggests that our sense of self, our awareness of our own bodies as distinct from the world around us, is crucial for how we experience and interpret sensations like tickling.
This is blowing my mind a little bit. It's like tickling is this gateway to understanding some of the biggest mysteries of the human brain. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the science of tickling. But like a good tickle, it's left me with a lingering sense of wonder and a whole lot of new questions to ponder.
And perhaps a newfound appreciation for the complexity of this seemingly simple sensation.
Absolutely. So the next time you find yourself in a tickle fight, or watching a baby giggle uncontrollably, remember that there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface than meets the eye.
Keep laughing. And keep exploring.
Until next time on Coffeesodes.